Welcome back to the PowerSwitch, gaming's call-in talk radio show. My name is Peter Spezia, and today is August 13th, 2017. This is the 35th episode of the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We use Discord as a means to add and drop callers to talk about video games and switch the power that is found in a typical gaming podcast. You can join our server to participate during recordings at rhymeswithasia.com/call. Well, thank you for joining me this week. We have a guest. I'd like to welcome Matt Zawodniak. He's been a contributor to the PowerSwitch. He's also worked in radio. Matt, welcome to the show as a guest host.
Hey.
Appreciate your time here.
I'd say it's a little generous to say I worked in radio. I studied radio and I work at a radio station, but I wouldn't say that I've worked in radio.
Well, I think it's more so than I have or many of us have. I'd be interested to hear your kind of view on the industry as it currently is. I mean, I guess, what do you do there, and what's it like to be in the radio business?
Well, like I said, to say that I work in radio is very generous. I work in their traffic department, which does not have anything to do with cars or traffic on the roads. It is my job to fit together where advertising runs on the logs for the days.
Yep.
The job that I'm doing right now has nothing to do with my degree. There are people that studied totally different fields in my department, and a couple people that didn't graduate college at all. So I am working for a media company, yes, but the closest that I've gotten to working in radio was at my college's radio station, which I was very closely involved in that. I was news director for a year, operations manager for a year after that. I was there a total of 3 years overall. And it was just a school station, but it was because they modeled it as closely as they could after real proper commercial stations. So I feel like I've gotten a decent idea as to how a station works, but the industry itself, all the politics of it, I haven't quite interacted with yet.
Well, you're certainly well-spoken on air. You speak well about games from your pastimes calling into the show, so I wanted to have you on as more of a guest component, kind of get you talking about games here. Let's start with what we're playing. I want to know what it is you're playing recently.
So just yesterday, I started playing Nier Automata. It's been on my waiting to play list for a while now, and I'm really excited to have finally gotten to it. I'm playing the PC version, and I was playing it on Steam Share because a friend of mine has a ton of Steam games, and he buys all the new games, so I don't have to.
That's a nice connection. Yep.
I played for a couple hours, and then he started playing it, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. It's really cool to see that he's playing." But now I can't play because you can't use someone's library. So I was like, "Okay, screw it. Let's drop $60." Which should tell you a bit about how I feel about the game.
Yeah, it's a strong contender for Game of the Year this year. I've heard it. A lot of people praise it highly.
I'm still very early in, and if it keeps up the quality that it is right now through the rest of the game, it might currently be my choice.
Wow.
Mario Odyssey's still off in the distance. That's a big competition, but as it is right now, it would beat Zelda, it would beat Yakuza, it would definitely beat Persona, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it. That game's not in contention for me anymore.
That really does speak highly, and I think it really comes down to if you dig the Platinum Games action of it. I think that's where it fell short for me. I found myself switching more often than not to the auto play to kind of have it, in a way play for you, and that kind of just told me enough that I like a lot of what it's doing. I mean, the soundtrack in the game is phenomenal. I still find myself listening to that, at least, today.
Undoubtedly best soundtrack of the year, I can say that.
Yeah, it's up there. I mean, I think Persona 5 may still edge that out for me, but it's 1A, 1B. It's really close. But yeah, as far as I got to, ending A, which is the first of the games. I think they have actually, 5 main endings.
There is technically 26 endings, one for each of the letter of the alphabet, but many of them are just small joke endings.
Yeah.
So there are 5 proper endings.
Yeah, I mean, you remove the core AI that makes your main character work. I mean, you die, game over, right? So
it's a bit of a misnomer to call them endings in the way that people usually think about them, because people usually think, alternate endings, play the game over again and you'll get a different ending. But actually, the playthroughs after your first one are substantially different.
Or shorter, yeah.
Yes, well, the second playthrough, I would liken it to the difference between Hero Story and Dark Story back in Sonic Adventure 2,
Good callback. Yep.
where some elements of it are the same, but many of them are different. And then the third and fourth playthroughs are completely different, like have nothing to do with what you did in the previous two. So there's a substantial amount of game there.
And had you played, many Platinum games before this? I'm trying to think, how to recommend it to someone. But, I found the action very similar to something like Bayonetta in a way. Of course, the same studio. But have you played any kind of Platinum games before this?
This would be my third and a half game. I never finished Bayonetta 2, but I've played Metal Gear Rising and Bayonetta 1.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Rising, I played a long time ago, and I didn't really give it a fair shot. Bayonetta, I felt, had something very good there, but ultimately kind of fell flat for me. Bayonetta 2, I remember liking very, very much, but it came out mere weeks before Smash Brothers on Wii U, so
right.
I simply didn't finish it in time, and then I haven't had the chance to go back to it.
Yeah, Metal Gear Rising is a really good comparison, especially with the sword, action there.
I find Nier Automata to be somewhat different from the traditional Platinum experiences. As far as you can say, there is a traditional Platinum experience because this is the genre they're most known for, but they've also done like Wonderful 101, they've done Star Fox Zero, they've done some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, I think, at one point. Yeah. So they're a very multifaceted company, but this is definitely along the lines of the game that they're most known for. But it's also more of an adventure game as well. And I think that the hardcore nature of the combat in Bayonetta, which is more of a score attack game than anything.
True.
When it comes down to it, that's toned down. This is more of an adventure game with a bit of a streamlined combat system. And I've spent the entire day pretty much doing side quests. I got to a certain point yesterday, and then spent the entire day today doing side quests, and then jumped into the main story in my last hour and found, now I've unlocked fast travel. That would have been nice to have while I was doing all those side quests.
That's a big moment there. So yeah, I definitely look forward to you playing more. It seems like you're really digging it. I really want to see the rest of it on YouTube, but if anyone's on the fence, I mean, definitely at least give it a try. Like it's an important game to play this year for sure.
By and far, it's absolutely excellent. I have been finally getting to the story mode of Splatoon 2, which is, well, it is certainly Splatoon 2. I'm not quite sure what I expected of it, but it is more of the same compared to Splatoon 1 than I expected it to be. I'm very happy with the multiplayer in Splatoon 2, because I think that it's a step up in just the right ways, but the single player, I'm having fun with it. I played it on a 3-hour flight and enjoyed it, but there's nothing pulling me to it, and I can't quite vocalize why that is.
Well, hopefully it's a short enough campaign you can power through it. It seemed like at least the first one, from what I heard, was like 5-6 hours maybe.
From what I know, it's very short.
Okay.
I've also we'll touch on it very briefly later, but I've been playing a lot of Overwatch as the Summer Games event rolls in, and it's always good for me to get back into that game. That's one of the few games that I go in and play ranked competitively, and according to my rank, I'm not terribly good at it, but I want to keep trying to improve, get better. So I'm playing it a lot now, and sort of getting my head around the meta, so to speak. The one thing that I haven't figured out is team composition. I will never figure that out in any game at all. But I'm getting a better game sense for what the enemy is doing and how to counter their movements.
All right. Well, I have been playing Batman: The Enemy Within. That's Telltale's season 2 of Batman, and the first episode came out. It keeps up the Batman quality. I don't think there's been a lost step. If anything, they've been trying new things. They definitely put their mark on what they think their version of the Batman universe should be, including big changes or character tweaks. One of the interesting things I found was in the promotion, they've been hyping up that Riddler is a big deal in this first episode, and he's played by Robin Atkin-Downes, who is Kaz Miller in MGS5. So to hear his voice come out of Riddler is certainly interesting. I think that was a good casting there. The big deal in this one, though, at least from how does it, change the Telltale formula? We had a good conversation on a past episode, you and I, of Telltale and, the direction that they're going. In addition to, the big moments that each Telltale episode is kind of known for, these one way or the other sort of decisions, you're making these decisions along the way, and they have something pop up that, your relationship with this character has changed. And in the ending sort of recap of what happened and how your choices affected things, you're looking at, Batman or Bruce Wayne's relationship with these key pivotal characters and where you stand with them and what choices made, what kind of, how it molded that relationship. So is your relationship strained with this person, or are you on, good terms with this person? I think it kind of fleshes out a little deeper on an episode by episode basis, like where you're at with these key players. And I think that makes it very interesting. Also, in some of the key action moments, you'll get a one choice or the other option. Like, do you want to, roundhouse kick this person, or do you want to, pull them with your bat grapple and punch them? It kind of mixes that up a little bit more. Like, that's not a huge difference, but it kind of mixes up the action a little bit. The story is really, really good. They set it up well, and they definitely put their marks on it. I mean, no spoilers or anything like that, but I'm looking forward to the upcoming episodes for that, because that series is one of my favorite games from last year, and good to see them continue with season 2, especially so right around the corner. Such a quick turnaround from season 1 there. I have other games that I've been looking forward to getting to, and I probably will continue at least one of these tonight, but Res Infinite was a surprise drop on Steam VR and Oculus, so to get that on PC, my brother popped for that one, so we'll be checking that out. That's a couple hour experience, but people were talking about as one of the best PlayStation VR experiences, at least at its launch. So I'm looking forward to seeing that in Vive. And then Ghost Recon Wildlands. Ubisoft has a couple games where you have like 5-hour trials on console. So if you want to check out Ghost Recon Wildlands, or For Honor's another one, but download the full game, play the first 5 hours or so. If you choose to get the game, your progress would continue over. So I'm interested to check out Ghost Recon Wildlands. I'm in the housing hunt. This is the last episode where I'm no longer a homeowner. So during the week, we'll be closing on a place. And so once that is done, the kind of credit checks are off. Big purchases can be made. Looking into deals for console bundles. This may be the week we also get an Xbox One. Best Buy has a deal where you buy a 1 terabyte Xbox One S and you get any game $59.99 or under free. And that includes pre-orders and whatnot. And so I'm looking, I'm like, what game would I play on Xbox One that's, the best place to play that game? I mean,
the new Bubsy collection.
Yeah, right. But that'd be like, what, $15-$20 or so. You gotta make the most for the value there. But, what isn't better on PlayStation 4? What isn't better on PC? And it's like, maybe Madden. I don't know. If it were something like, Star Wars Battlefront 2, like that's going to be better on PS4. If it were Overwatch Game of the Year edition, well, that'd be better on PC. It's hard to kind of pick there, but I'll eventually have to make a call there one way or the other. It might end up with Madden. Coming up, I tweeted at you, and we had Doba, who calls into the show as well. I tweeted on my personal Twitter account that Yakuza 0 is coming up in the GameFly queue. That probably arrives tomorrow. I'm looking forward to giving that a try.
You'll be finishing that up right around the time that Yakuza Kiwami starts.
Very true. Very true. It's a big, big year for Yakuza. Also on Tuesday, Sonic Mania. That's another.
It's funny
one.
You say it's a big, big year for Yakuza, because in its home country of Japan, it's getting no new games this year.
Well, yeah,
because
it came out
Yakuza
a couple years
0
ago.
came out 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to have it kind of finally land westward and in a big, impactful way, that's a big deal for that franchise for sure. But yeah, Tuesday's big, Sonic Mania on all the different platforms except PC. That got pushed back a couple weeks for to really refine it, and I guess PC players also get Sonic 1 to compensate. It's not like they wouldn't already own that. And then Undertale's come to PS4 and Vita. I think I'm looking forward to playing that on Vita portably on my work travel that's coming up. So lots to play. The year of 2017 continues in a big way for games. But let's get to our headline roundup. Matt, we start with Middle-earth: Shadow of War, adding microtransactions, which is unusual to always see for a full $60 single-player game, but the idea here is that, you can buy gold to get these, in a way, loot boxes where you can add, either loot, weapons, orcs to your army, and it helps speed the single player process along. And so people say, well, as long as, there isn't really multiplayer, well, there's kind of the forward operating bases comparison to Metal Gear Solid 5, where you have these little outposts that you can do sort of PvP battles, and like the bot elements can be impacted there. Of course, they always give the talking point where, the single player content, you can not buy any microtransactions and you can still have a fine single player experience, but it may take longer. Your thoughts on microtransactions in these single player games?
So there were 2 Western developed games that I cared about for the rest of the year. It was Shadow of War and Star Wars Battlefront 2. And both of them, because of loot boxes and microtransactions, I don't care anymore.
Wow. That really, really goes to show. And I'm sure they're going to make a difference, in the end financially. You're seeing what it does with Overwatch, and like that pulls in crazy money. But, Overwatch is a great competitive game on its own, and those are all cosmetic. They don't really affect the balance overall. So it's going to be interesting. I see a lot of comments of like, well, this is a great way for me not to care about this game anymore. And yeah, that's really tough.
You can't put gachapon mechanics like this in a single player $60 game. I think it's unacceptable. I don't think there's anything to say about it. It's just inherently wrong. Mm-hmm. It's affecting the gameplay of a single player game using loot chests. Like, gachapon's bad enough on mobile where the games are free.
Right. Yeah, that's a really delicate situation. I'm not someone who was really looking forward to this game, but I agree. Like that, if I was interested, that would definitely put a black mark on it for sure. 1 year later, No Man's Sky has released their massive Atlas Rising update, and kudos to Sean Murray and that team. They're making big changes. This apparently streamlined travel, 30 hours of new story, new aliens, new ships, better graphics, and even some rudimentary multiplayer. Yes, players are starting to see each other for real in the No Man's Sky world. I think this is just worth mentioning, the continuing saga of that game. Many people may not care anymore. I think they were talking about their player base, and maybe they're at, whether it's 250,000 or 500,000, players, something like that. They had this big ARG going. I'm glad that they could at least find some life after the disaster that was that launch.
It's never a bad thing for a game to start turning around and make things better, but public image of that company took a hit. It is still tough to say that we can trust with their word ever again, given it took a year to get some of the most basic features that they promised at launch.
Right. And it's a free update, so if you still have No Man's Sky sitting in your library somewhere, maybe boot it back up, give it another try if that interests you. Polygon has parted ways with their video producer Nick Robinson after Twitter allegations. A real nasty story here, and worth mentioning because it really kind of got the gaming community in a bit of a frenzy. He was taking a shot at Overcooked and their Switch port, and then you had people kind of take shots at him based on his interactions with women in the games industry and really inappropriate sexual advances. I guess his personality grew for being on different podcasts. He had Cool Games Inc., which is a game podcast where you could pitch different games, and he had Car Boys with I think it was Griffin McElroy, where they looked at this car video game and all the physics there. I get his personality grew, and then his overall maturity level didn't. He put out, I think, all things considered, a fair apology, and he has a lot to learn. He has to take some time away. It's just unfortunate when I've seen him on different podcasts. He seemed like a good dude, and when you see things like that happen, it's like, yeah, dude, you fucked up. Like there's no words for that.
I frankly had never heard of him before this all started. I've no opinion on him, so what he did I could say is objectively wrong, but don't know who he is, to be honest. I don't follow Polygon, so
yeah. No, it's the right move for sure, and it's not acceptable in any way, but it's really got the game industry talking, and it really just comes down to you have to be professional in whatever you do. I mean, if you start interacting with people in your industry, you better be your best self to them, because it's, especially when it's a small family in a way like that, it's all going to come back around and bite you. So you got to communicate in your best way online. Like that's really all it comes down to. Overwatch, we mentioned you're big into that. They're to receive a free deathmatch mode, which is for a game that's based in cooperation and teamwork, whether you're delivering the payload or other objectives, to finally go towards deathmatch, which is I think something that the team said that they'd never really do. That's an interesting move. I'm curious on your take on it.
So this is actually playable on their public test realm right now, essentially their open beta for new features coming. So I've had a chance to play it. It's going to be in their arcade mode section, so they won't be doing any character balance or any design decisions around it. It won't be a main function of the game. And I do think it's a fun novelty. It's pretty cool. It changes the way that you think about the game and characters in it. But at its heart, Overwatch is a 6v6 cooperative game built around objectives. The characters really are not balanced for this mode. So in free-for-alls, there are about 3 viable characters. And I've had a ton of time with the team death matches, but they're overall kind of shallow and very fleeting. I'm most excited about this for the custom game mode, because Overwatch has a very robust custom game mode where you can change up tons and tons of things about how the game works, the physics, the balance, the certain moves being enabled and disabled. It makes for a very hectic and wacky game, and this having a free-for-all mode in that opens up the door for new things. Me and some friends made a mode in the PTR called The Highest of Noons, where it was all McCree free-for-all deathmatch, instant kill. As soon as you hit someone with one shot, your ultimate charges completely, and you could jump into the air with no gravity whatsoever. So you could do his high noon ultimate and instantly kill 6 people on the map all at once.
Dang. I think to someone like me who tinkered a bit with Overwatch wasn't necessarily for them, I think an announcement like this piques my interest a little bit more. I will say that it just shows the versatility of the platform. You're seeing in something like Overwatch League how it's growing in the professional circuit. So clearly the game has legs. Clearly the game's going to be around for quite some time. And to show that you can put in a mode like this, have it be free, as you say, not have it affect the character balance. I think that's a big boon for it. Like that's a big win. And so I'm curious to see, maybe do I pick it back up with something like this? But it's a great announcement.
It's good also that all of their updates are free. They have never charged for any additions to the game, and they do not plan to do so. So anytime that you kind of lapse for a bit because lost your interest, whenever something new pops up, you can immediately jump back in with no commitments. So the game is positioned to have a lot of longevity as long as they keep doing updates.
Yeah, and it works perfectly well when you're making so much money on the loot boxes. So good on Blizzard for that one for sure. And finally, Nintendo World Championships is back for 2017. Now, granted, I think World Championships at this point, a bit of a misnomer. These are certain locations throughout the United States where you're doing time trials.
Locations.
Yeah. So you gotta travel if you want to participate. Mario Kart 7, Luigi's Mansion. Do 2 time trials. Pick the best time, and if you're a winner there, you get to move on. I think this is more interesting.
Mario Kart 7. That's 2 Mario Karts ago.
Right. But I think it's on 3DS. Everyone should be able to access it. It's a bigger net to cast. I think that's a tough call. I think the more interesting thing there, on October 7th, they'll have the actual World Championships, and that ties up with New York Comic-Con. I think it's around that time, so that makes sense. I have to wonder, why do you bring this back this year after taking the year off in 2016 rather? Do you have a game to announce?
They have to. I can't imagine any other reason they'd be doing this.
If Smash Brothers for Switch is not announced here, I think it's a big mistake.
I'm still not convinced Smash Brothers for Switch exists. Or ever will.
Well, at this point, if you're waiting so long, yeah.
Obviously, there will be a Smash Brothers for Switch eventually, but I am not convinced and do not necessarily believe that a port of Smash Brothers for Wii U to Switch exists.
Well, I think if you're talking about world championships and competitive games and things like that, and if you want to make a splash, I just think it's unusual. They take the year off. In 2015 was the big deal at E3 right before that. That was a great event. But yeah, they took 2016 off, and to bring it back this year, there has to be a reason. So I'm curious.
They may also be positioning it to sort of headline something that they've already announced but isn't necessarily on our radar, because that's what they did last time with Super Mario Maker. We didn't necessarily care about Super Mario Maker until we saw it at the Nintendo World Championships.
Yeah.
Then interest went way, way up because we did already know about the game, but no one cared as much until that event. And then everyone cared.
They're talking about demos for Super Mario Odyssey and Metroid Samus Returns at these Best Buy locations. I wonder if, they'll do some sort of thing with Mario Odyssey.
I'm also pretty sure that that's on the actual nwc.nintendo.com. I've never seen that Art of Link before on the side.
Interesting. DLC for Breath of the Wild? Maybe? I don't know. Something to keep in mind for sure. But let's get to our main topic for the show. It really caused a stir and just really interesting game marketing overall. Last week for our Games for August segment at the end of the show, we talked about Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice, which is this, it's kind of a AAA kind of effort from Ninja Theory. So, DMC Devil May Cry. We have Heavenly Sword, these kind of action games from them. But they're kind of putting forth this big effort, but releasing at a $30 price point and seeing how that goes for them. It's a 6-hour game. It's interesting to really see the reaction from people playing it, and it seems like there's a lot of good quality here, storytelling and the like. But what really caught everyone's eye is that at the beginning of the game, reviews were reporting that the text pops up on the screen that says, "The dark rot will grow each time you fail. If the rot reaches Senua's head, her quest is over, and all progress will be lost." And so this brings up the topic of permadeath. What did you think when you first saw this story?
This game came on my radar very recently, when the Best Friends did a Let's Play of it, which I actually still have not watched that video yet, but I skimmed through it, and the game looks very fantastic from what I can see. And the game is about a character who is going through deep psychosis and struggling with just sort of like a fight to survive, not only against things in the world but also against her own mind, struggling with the will to continue in the face of great risk, struggle, adversity, and the aspect of this sort of roguelike permadeath that they've added is meant to sort of put the player into that mindset, put them into the mindset of being very unnerved and panicked that each move could genuinely be their last. It's something where they try to make the mechanics of the game support the narrative. And I think that the way that they've done it is something very interesting and unique. It is something that I would like to see them carry through. It's a game that doesn't compromise its own message and narrative and mechanics for the sake of what everyone thinks a game should be. And I've seen some people call this an objectively bad design decision, which I think is very upsetting. Imagine if every movie had to have a streamlined plot so that it was fully accessible to everyone. The sheer art of filmmaking would suffer for that. So I don't understand why people want to impose those restrictions instead on games and say that because this makes the game less accessible, it is inherently bad. I think that feeling that way does nothing but hold gaming back, because I think that there is the idea of using the unique pieces of what make games compared to other media, using those to our advantage to craft new stories and new experiences is something that we should be looking at with interest. And maybe it won't work. Maybe it'll end up being clumsy, but we shouldn't just dismiss it offhand from a headline.
Preach, my man. I mean, that's really the crux of it, I think, is, when it came down to it, people were starting to dig more like, how does this permadeath mechanic work? And it may end up being all of a bluff. I mean, I think people are still trying to experience it, and haven't seen too many reports of people like actually losing their save files. I mean, right from the beginning, people are trying to die, so very often, and like the rot isn't killing Senua. But you're right. It's based on the specific goals and theming, as you mentioned, of the Psychosis. And it's a game where they recommend, surround sound or headphones, because you have these characters of the Furies who are kind of, whispering or being the voices inside Senua's head, and, casting a lot of doubt and, inflicting that fear in a way. And it really kind of builds on not only her emotions and mental state, but it really affects the player as well. And yeah, again, as you said, it really is, narrative, built out into game mechanic. And I think that's a really, really important thing. You were seeing a lot of people say, well, permadeath is a terrible thing. It should never be in games, and it's an outdated mechanic, back from a time where they're trying to extract money, and so it's bad. And this is, people who haven't played the game. I mean, Total Biscuit was a noted example of, making these big hot takes on Twitter, but not playing the game and understanding its purpose in there. And you're right. When it comes down to game developers and how do we want games to move forward? Do we just want all, AAA games to just keep trying the same things, have the same kinds of experiences with slight little tweaks, or do we want developers to take risks? Now, granted, it would be a big risk for a company who's not only, kind of experimenting on what kind of game they can make, but also experimenting with the price point in the market. At the end of the day, the market's going to decide whether they want to play this or not. And it just made for unusual messaging, I think, on launch day, when those review embargoes were up. You could have had a game that was just shining based on stellar reviews. I mean, getting a lot of high 8s, low 9s, really, for Hellblade Senua Sacrifice. But it was really this story that was kind of starting to mar the message a little bit, because some people may just say, oh, well, permadeath, I'm not going to buy it, and then not read any further. Granted, some people may say, it's spoilers, but I would disagree. But yeah, we need more games to take more risks.
I don't believe in compromising the game's core mechanics just for the sake of making things simpler for an audience. Even when we're not talking about the narrative, we can talk just about gameplay mechanics. Another game that has permadeath was Fire Emblem for a long time. Now, I don't necessarily think that the way that Fire Emblem had permadeath was the best thing in the world, because it would be very frustrating for a random critical hit to take out a unit at the very end of a map, and then you'd have to start the whole thing over again if you wanted to keep them. But I think that completely doing away with any consequences of losing a unit as a whole was a mistake. It's a reason that I don't enjoy playing Fire Emblem on casual mode, is because I find that my play style is completely different. I don't think, what do I need to do to succeed in this instance? I think, how many units do I need to throw at this bad guy before he falls over? If they had implemented something where if your unit fell in battle, then they would have to sit out the next battle while they were recovering. Something like that would be a much more effective solution, where it's not punishing, but it is still consequential, each movement that you make. The game compromised on what it was about for the sake of accessibility. And I think that there is this pervasive idea that we need to make games as accessible as possible. And that is just not what media and art are about. It's not about being accessible. It's about having something that you want to say or something that you want to do. And we can have places where we make them more accessible when they don't compromise the message. Modes that make things a little lighter for people with disabilities, colorblind mode, things like that. We can make, we can go the extra mile to make things work when they can. But there comes a certain point where you need to say, this is what I want to make out of this game. You can't make music for someone who's deaf. You can't have someone who's blind fully experience cinematography. And at some point, you just need to accept that some people just aren't going to be able to get the most out of video games. So I don't like the idea that having something that is inherently more difficult is a bad thing. It's not going to be for everyone, but art rarely is. And I think that this is a game that is trying to sort of be art in a way, have a message it wants to tell, and make an impact in a new, unique way. So I don't believe that it is right to say that its permadeath is inherently bad. If we play the game and find that the message doesn't quite line up, that the narrative falls flat, then that's something to think about. But people aren't playing this game. They're seeing the word permadeath and immediately writing it off. And I think that is bad.
Yeah, that's the struggle there. And I think even for those who were looking forward to this being an actual mechanic and to see it, be a bluff or whatever, I think it just shows the diversity of players that, I'm disappointed that this is, in a way, a fake out. I do wonder if something like this, could be patched in on like a very higher difficulty setting, like to give those players the option. And I think it's what it comes down to, is at least have the option. I mean, you mentioned something like Fire Emblem, they patched out the option. Something like XCOM, had that as an option. So there's a balance between, the studio's art and the message that they're trying to craft. But I think, giving players options is always a good thing. I would like to see this as a possibility in Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice to, maybe patch in a higher difficulty to at least have this permadeath as intended, because it's a 6-hour campaign and it puts real stakes in it, and it really, puts the pressure on the player as the developers really intended. Something to keep an eye on. It's one of those gut checks for the industry to see, where we are in the industry, where we are with games, and where we are with, not only the growth, but making games available to players. So that's what we have to say. When we come back, we will get to the callers. We could talk about the permadeath and that situation, the main topic, any of the headlines, games you're playing recently, anything. That's all when we come back here on the Power Switch. Welcome back to the Power Switch, joined by Matt Zawodniak, who's called into the show. Welcome back, of course.
Hey.
Hey. And so we'll get to the point of the show where we have you, the callers, call in, have your voice heard, share your perspectives. Looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say today. Joining us from Illinois, Video Game Guru 64. Welcome back to the Power Switch.
Nice to be back.
Yeah, thank you for calling in. What would you like to talk about today?
I would like to talk about the Monster Hunter Stories demo that was released for the 3DS, I think it was last Thursday, and how that demo is significantly different from the anime that's going on right now. I think it's at episode 41.
Oh my gosh.
And it's very, very good.
So this is a transmedia project?
Yes.
Okay.
See, I can't say I've heard of, and not only, I mean, I know of Monster Hunter Stories, been seeing, game announcements for that. Didn't know there was demo for one, and then much less didn't know that there's an anime going for it. I mean, gosh, episode 41, that's wild. I guess, to start off, I mean, what is the gist of Monster Hunter Stories? What makes it different from a more mainline numbered Monster Hunter installment?
The story's completely different. You're in like a village that hunts monsters as they befriend monsters and ride them and keep other monsters and humans from fighting. That's basically the gist of what the anime. But what the Monster Hunter Story game does, it's more like Pokemon. So it's more like you fighting monsters and befriending them, but it's still
okay. So stories, I guess, with more JRPG Pokemon like combat as opposed to the main Monster Hunter games where it's open world and taking down these giant beasts for loot and making yourself a stronger hunter. That's interesting how they mix it up like that.
Though it's not quite that inspired by Pokemon. It's still Monster Hunter in that you can pick up orbs and everything on your way to hunt or your way to the next objective. And there's you can equip gear to upgrade your character, and you can have different weapons and everything. So it's not that different from Monster Hunter, but it's turn-based RPG than a action RPG.
So
Okay.
it does not have the traditional Monster Hunter style combat.
No, it doesn't.
That's a
Interesting.
big difference. Now with the anime, are we talking about one main protagonist and his journey to be the very best Monster Hunter like no one ever was, or what's the deal there?
Not exactly. So the anime focuses more on main character is Blue, and the default character in the game is named Blue, or Sonya if you want to have a girl character. The big thing to get the story rolling is every few years or something like that, there's a blighted monsters, and it's like a dark mist that covers the monsters and the land, and you have to purify them. And in the anime, they purify them and don't hurt the monsters. Well, try not to hurt the monsters because they don't know. The monsters don't know what it's doing. So, going for the anime, like episode 13 is a big turning point for the characters because one of the main character's mom dies. He is crushed by it, and he wants revenge for the blighted monsters. So he goes out. It's not the main character; it's this sidekick to the main character, and he goes off from the main character and finds his own path, and the main character also finds his own path, and they are clashing whenever they meet, and they haven't wrapped it up yet, so
Okay.
I don't know everything, but yeah, that's the main crux.
So something to keep an eye on for sure. I mean, to give the demo a try for Monster Hunter Stories, absolutely. And then it's good to see Monster Hunter, a very big thing in Japan. So where can people check out the anime if they're interested?
On Funimation dubbed, and I think it's on Crunchyroll subbed, but I'm not completely sure. I'm pretty sure though it's on Crunchyroll because they have a thing going on with Funimation.
Yeah, they partnered up there. Oh, it's interesting that they get the dub turnaround so quick. That's interesting to see.
Yeah.
Matt, you're interested in experience with Monster Hunter? I mean, I don't have really any, but do you have some?
I have tried Monster Hunter games in the past, and there's just something about it that I have a lot of trouble getting into. I appreciate very much that there's an idea of crafting your own gear and collecting resources and everything to really prepare for a fight beforehand. But I found the actual loot drops to be too slow and inconsistent. You would have to fight the same enemy over and over again, upwards of 10 to 20 times.
I hated that.
It was not for me because there was too much repetition and progress was too slow. I really appreciate the idea of having to prepare yourself. I did like that, but there was too much of a slog in that preparation.
To Hunter Story credit, I've watched a review of the demo, and it doesn't seem to be that much of a slog, and it doesn't. There's no more random loop drops. It's like drops.
So the drops are consistent a bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, that I think is a very good change. I think I'm more likely to be interested in this game than I am in any other Monster Hunters.
Yeah, I want to talk about the permadeath, and I agree with you. More developers need to take that risk of having permadeath in their games, or some sort of permadeath, like not maybe permadeath, more risks.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that every single game in the world needs permadeath. I would never say that.
I know.
Some games like the Mario games nowadays, I think, are actually a little silly now in how they still have game over states because they're essentially meaningless.
Yeah.
But there's the idea of shaking up traditional conventions, and that's what I want to see a bit more of.
And of course, when it makes sense with, the game's mechanics, the game's narrative, I think it's all about, sticking to a vision and not just, game development by numbers. It's not just, oh, this is the way things are, so this is the way we must do it. No, like we gotta put, games are art, right? So there's gotta be a vision behind it. And yeah, I think if it makes sense, have permadeath in there as an option. I think that's, appreciated to give more players a more, diverse options. But I could totally respect and understand if a studio was really sticking to that vision. Like, say if Hellblade really did stick to this and it wasn't all a bluff or what have you, and I say like, no, this is what our game's about. We're trying to cater to those who are interested in that kind of game. And if our game isn't for you, I'm sorry to hear that, but that's the way it is.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but isn't there another game on Steam that has like permadeath in it?
I would say that a more accurate term here is that it's having a roguelike experience.
Yeah.
Roguelike games are defined by the fact that you get one life and one chance, and as soon as you die, you start over from the beginning. It's a whole genre of games, Binding of Isaac being one of the most popular ones.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of roguelike games on the Switch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, another good one, and it's interesting to see, where design differences can carry over. If you haven't played Rogue Legacy, give that one a try. And that's one where you're trying to make progress into this world based on the idea of each life being an ancestor or a descendant. And, after you die, like you kind of bring something back, like you have a new ability that this new descendant can go through the world and make further progress in it. But yeah, for Binding of Isaac, it's like a start over from scratch.
Yeah, and Rogue, of course, Rogue was obviously the namesake of the genre. So Rogue Legacy, a follow-up to it, definitely worth checking out if this is the kind of game that interests you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just unusual to see it in a single-player narrative adventure, and I think it's a big step. But yeah, as we talked about before, like I'd want to see it patched back in as an option, as as strict as it may have been and possibly intended. Just that would be curious vision to see carried through, and something to definitely keep an eye on. But all for developers continuing their visions and crafting an experience based on that. Well, Video Game Guru 64, thank you for calling in. We can find you on Twitter at Video Game Guru 64. Anything you'd like to plug?
If you're interested in the Monster Hunter Stories discussion that we had, this is a good video to check out. It's a review of the demo for Monster Hunter Stories.
All right, and check it out in the show notes from Gadget Girl Kylie on YouTube. Make sure to check that out. Well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you calling in. You have a great night, all right?
Okay. Yep.
All right, guys, thanks for calling in. When we come back, we will get to Matt's top 5 favorite games of all time. I'm looking forward to this list, and hopefully you are too. That will be when we come back here on the Power Switch. Welcome back to the Power Switch. This week's Tempo Control music is brought to you by Sonic Generations. You can find a new video game music top 10 list from a specific game soundtrack every Tuesday over at youtube.com/rhymeswithasia. Back here with Matt Zawodniak. Let's go over your top 5 favorite games of all time. Looking forward to this list.
So I made a point to not count any games that I played for the first time within the last year. It is very easy for, the newest thing to leave the best impression on you.
Yes, a recency bias, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to avoid that. So we've got, coming in at number 5, this is a game that has been vindicated a bit by history, and I think was way ahead of its time in its social commentary. It's Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty.
Hell yeah.
Nowadays, I place this top in the Metal Gear series, even above 3, because of just how utterly outstanding it was at looking ahead to the future and predicting exactly where society would be right now in this very day. Because the way that the AI at the end of the game talk to you about how society is heading, what they've become, it is dead on. absolutely ahead of its time, and it's a full-on commentary of the relationship between player and game. Even the fact that player hates Raiden, you're supposed to hate Raiden. It is part of the narrative because even Raiden hates Raiden. You identify with him more by hating him.
That's why I find it really frustrating when people are all like, the worst protagonist in games, Raiden from Metal Gear Solid 2. Like, and that they don't even think about those consequences or reasons. I mean, Kojima, brilliant.
Yeah, you play that entire game wishing you were playing as Solid Snake because Raiden wishes that he was Solid Snake through the whole game.
Yeah, that is my favorite Metal Gear story, and it's up there. Like it's really, really good. And the gameplay improvements that they made from the original Metal Gear Solid, I mean, so much so that they bring those mechanics back into Twin Snakes for the GameCube. It's really solid, and you're right when it's so spot on for a game that was in 2001, and it speaks a lot. Today, 16 years later, that's my favorite Metal Gear game. I'd agree.
Absolutely fantastic. Coming at number 4, the first online game I ever played. Played it for a very long time, and it left one hell of an impression on me. Shaped my taste in gaming to this day. Star Wars Battlefront 2 on PlayStation 2.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot tell you how much time I put into that game. Maybe more than any other game in my life. The control point mode in the multiplayer had the real feeling that you were a part of a battle in the Star Wars universe. And I saw a critique of the new Battlefront nowadays, and like the key crucial thing that they got wrong is that in the original Battlefront 2 and Battlefront, you felt like you were a soldier in Star Wars. In the new Battlefront, you feel like you're an extra in a Star Wars film. Because there's all this wacky crap going on with jetpacks and power-ups and everything. Star Wars Battlefront 2015 feels like a Star Wars video game. Star Wars Battlefront 2 for PS2 feels like Star Wars. It feels like you are a part of that universe. And the gameplay mechanics as well, with reinforcements being the lives for your entire team. They're going down faster if you don't control the battlefield. And ultimately that can be the big deciding factor for who wins the whole battle. Really, truly one of the finest multiplayer experiences I've ever had. Even now that the servers have been shut down online, there are still fan servers up. People play the game to this day. There is a reason. Because, goddamn, what a fantastic game.
And it really says a lot that when another game comes around to be named Star Wars Battlefront 2, as you mentioned earlier in this episode, that, your interest isn't as high as it could be.
I saw a picture online of the opening scene of Force Awakens, where Kylo Ren is the new Star Wars Battlefront, and Max von Sydow's character is the Battlefront 2, the original. And it's Kylo Ren says, "Look how old you've become," and Max von Sydow says, "Something far worse has happened to you."
That really says enough. What about number 3?
That would be one of my earliest experiences with a game that decided to deconstruct its genre. This is not the first game in this series that I played, but it is by far my favorite. Tales of the Abyss. The Tales series is difficult to play because the idea behind them is that they take all of the generic JRPG anime crap that you're used to, and the first 10 hours of a Tales game are generic JRPG anime crap. It is awful until right around the 10-hour mark, the end of the first act of the game, things turn around on their head, and it becomes a unique story that is directly addressing these JRPG tropes, cliches, and examining what they could mean in a larger story, breaking it down, making something new out of it, and having a message to go along with it. It addresses these ideas and asks the player to make a judgment on what they mean, and comes out on the other side with a statement about what this would mean with real people, how this kind of world would actually work with all the cynicism and terribleness of humanity, and manages not to be like some edgelord grimdark game while doing it. It still manages to have a light tone. It manages to be very fun while examining these tropes and making a new story out of them. Tales of Symphonia was the first Tales game that I played, but Tales of the Abyss is the one that to this day I can still go back to and really enjoy, really play over and over. and still to this day my favorite game in the franchise.
It makes me feel really bad that I'm probably right at that 10-hour mark. And yeah, going through the struggles of Luke as a character and how just, when people say like, oh, he's one of the worst, video game protagonists, like obviously, yeah, things change around, and as you mentioned, but yeah, if you take that early sample size, yeah, it's pretty shitty.
The people that say that are the people that never got through the game. Because at the beginning, Luke is totally insufferable. He's unbelievably terrible as a person. But the point of the game is his character arc as he grows and learns what the world is about, what it means to be a part of the world, what it means to be human, even in his case. And he ends up being one of my favorite protagonists in all of gaming because of the development that he takes over the course of the game. So whenever someone says Luke is the worst protagonist they've ever said, he whines so much, he's terrible. What that says to me is you didn't get very far in that game.
Yeah.
And I love the Tales franchise. Tales of the Abyss, I'm very happy to hear that you're in that one. Did you ever play any others? I know you had a tempo control about Symphonia, but did you ever really play it?
I did play it. I did beat Symphonia. I did like that.
Okay.
And
so you understand like the arc of a Tales game then.
Right, yes. And one I really do want to get to, we had Alex O'Neill on the show, and a big Tales fan. I mean, Scott White, also a huge Tales fan. Alex really talks up Vesperia, and that's one I definitely want to try at least.
Vesperia, unfortunately, I never got around to.
Yeah.
Because it was on Xbox specifically.
Yeah.
And the PlayStation version never came to America. But I've heard it is among the best.
Yeah.
Probably the only reason that I don't feel that it is because I never got around to it.
And I do really want to get back to at least to start that turning point, because I feel like I'm really like right on that precipice. So like that's something.
What about would you say is the most recent thing that's happened?
Oh God, no, it's been years. I couldn't possibly say.
So you would probably have to like take another shot at it again then.
Probably would. I have it on 3DS as well. We were playing on PS2, Scott and me, but I have it on 3DS. So if I ever wanted to power through that, there at least is that option for portable.
Yeah, I would hate to say that you need to start that multiple hour game again, but Tales stories are very dense. I'll always admit they're difficult to get through. So it's if you've gone this long without really getting it, then you're probably going to go back to it from the beginning.
I do remember that Luke was kind of having little mental breakdowns on a ship. So like it feels like maybe things were like starting to happen, and then maybe we're going to either the desert or the sewers or something like that, or some dingy town, something like that.
I think you got a little while ago.
Yeah.
Still.
Okay. Well, I mean, because we were kind of hitting and getting close to that, but yeah, it's definitely what I want to get back to.
There's a point where he finally gets back to his hometown and then is given like a special mission as a hero.
Okay.
That's where it's about to happen.
Okay, that's good to know.
Essentially, when you hear the word Exariuth, that's the Tower of Salvation.
That the name sounds familiar, but I don't know if it was part of a mission yet. So, Okay, number two.
Number two, the Fire Emblem franchise, obviously one of my favorites of all time. So this has to go to what is my favorite Fire Emblem game, Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on GameCube. This was actually my first Fire Emblem. And to this day, I think it is among the best, if not the best. The Tellius games, as they are for the continent that they take place on, Ike's games, they are the best intersection of gameplay advancement and genuinely good story that this series has ever had. As much as I do like Awakening, I feel like it did suffer a bit in that the story was a bit of a letdown compared to other games in the franchise, specifically Ike's games, the Tellius games. Path of Radiance is almost like a lighter Game of Thrones in how intriguing the politics of the world are, how strong the protagonists are in trying to get what they want to do done. It examines themes of racism a bit with the Lagoo's shape-shifting characters versus the normal humans in the world, and touches on the how those things go directly into the politics of the world, how it affects the ongoing war, diplomacy between nations, all on top of one of the finest strategy games I played in my life. It's a toss-up between Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Each one does certain things better than the other. Each one does things worse than the other. Path of Radiance is ultimately what I would say is the better game, but it comes very close between the two. And I will always hold those two games up as, one of the best moments in the whole franchise. Echoes, I see Video Game Guru 64 in the chat is pointing out, is a very good one. Echoes very well might surpass them, but unfortunately, like I said, I'm keeping it to games that I played before 1 year ago today. So Echoes very well may surpass it, but for now, I'll leave it with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
And I know you've been a big proponent for having the representation from those games in these newer Fire Emblem games, specifically Fire Emblem Warriors and things like that. Because those
Fire Emblem Warriors upsets me so
yeah,
much.
Yeah, because it's been a game that's focused on the awakening and fates, and when it really came into the wider gaming mainstream. But those are still important games in Fire Emblem's history.
They are, and it's very sad for me to see Fates as being held up as one of, I guess, Intelligent Systems thinks it's one of their best. It's really among their worst. The story is kind of garbage. That's not. A lot of people will say, "Oh, the localization was what ruined it." No, that story was just garbage. Corrin is a nonsensical character, and nothing makes sense in that plot. It was such a disappointment to me. The games themselves are okay. I still see them as somewhat disappointing, but they're not terrible in the gameplay department. But Fates I hold up as a dark time in the franchise.
Very interesting. So then what is your number one?
I've held this one as the number one for a very long time, and nothing has managed to dethrone it in many, many years. This is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. One of the best, if not the best experiences ever in a video game. It has a fully fleshed out world of characters that are real. They have a real schedule that they follow over the course of 3 days. The world comes alive in these characters that have things that they do day to day. They have stories that they do day to day. In this bleak, near apocalyptic world, as you're seeing the emotions that they have for the world ending. You can make a difference in their lives, and try to reunite lovers, bring families together, manage to even just do such a small thing as help a postman finish his daily route. This game has a world that is real, with gameplay that ties directly into this world. The 3 days mechanic, people think of it as like a strict time limit. It's not that strict when you come down to it, because you only need to do finite things within those 3 days. I've never found it to be difficult to do anything within the course of those 3 days, because you can slow it down a bit. And the only time that there is really anything that needs to be done quickly is a whole dungeon. And a whole dungeon doesn't take those 3 days unless you truly, truly get stuck and have no idea what to do. And even then you can return to that dungeon already knowing every solution where everything is, and probably have some items from it too to jumpstart into it. I've never really felt a criticism of the game that made sense to me, because all the criticism seems so superficial. The story is fantastic. The characters are real people that are fully fleshed out. The dungeons, while I wouldn't say that they're the best dungeons in the franchise, I'd say that goes to Twilight Princess. They're very good dungeons with interesting concepts going on, and the whole game comes together so well. It lasts exactly as long as it needs to. I've heard people say that there's not enough dungeons, but the process of leading up to those dungeons are puzzle environments in themselves. So I would argue there are 8 or 9 dungeons, counting, leading up to them. So even that criticism never made sense to me. It's one of the most fully formed ideas that the series has ever had. And it came from the idea of take the assets we have and make something new in a year. I would love to see that again. I would love for them to use the assets, the engines, all of that they already have, and make a new idea out of it, since they don't have to spend time getting the technology together. That's what I want to see from more games, just in general. I want to see new ideas using the technology that they have, new experiences, because this was one of the best experiences that I've had, because it was a risk. It was a new concept that was made just to experiment with what they already had. And it's stuck with me to this day as the most memorable game I've ever played, and by far my favorite.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd love to see something like for Breath of the Wild when they have that kind of core in place, and seeing what they can do with that. Very, very
Breath
strong
of the Wild
list. Yeah.
is begging for something like this because they spent so much time getting the technology right that some aspects of the world and the puzzles and the gameplay, the story are lacking. So if you take that outstanding technology that they've already got and make some new ideas with it, we could have one of the best games ever made.
Yeah, and they have the DLC coming out later this year. Another news story was that Horizon Zero Dawn, for a game that launched right around the same time as Breath of the Wild, announced their Frozen Wilds DLC for November 7th. And so it would be interesting to see when Breath of the Wild's story DLC comes out. I got to hope that, they're at least starting pre-production for another future Switch game or whatever next platform maybe after Switch, but kind of using that as a basis. I mean, sure, they could do another, 2D Zelda top-down sort of thing as well, but you don't have all of that work go to waste. Absolutely. So yeah, very strong list. I mean, number 5, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Number 4, Star Wars Battlefront 2 from 2005. Number 3, Tales of the Abyss. Number 2 was Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. And then Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Really, really strong list there. I was almost expecting Persona 3 to pop up there.
Persona, as much as it means to me, there's no one Persona game that I would say comes together so well that there aren't blatant flaws with them. The games mean very much to me emotionally, and they do some really great things, and they are definitely outstanding. But it's very difficult for me to include games on my list of best ever whatever when there's like something very fundamentally wrong with them. In Persona 3, the Dungeon of Tartarus is so fundamentally boring and such a chore to get through. It's difficult to say that it feels finished. Persona 4, I actually have never finished, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Because it's been so long that I can't even remember what exactly it was that made me quit playing. But I can't really count that one either. And Persona 5... I can't really go into for risk of spoilers, but there are definite things in the story that are half-baked in addition to the dungeons. The very first dungeon is the best dungeon in the whole franchise, and then the rest of them are forgettable at best and incredibly frustrating at worst.
Yeah.
So
I hear ya.
It's a very important series to me, very great games, but when we're talking strictly of what's the best I've ever played, I just can't count them.
Well, it's a very strong list nonetheless, absolutely. And that'll do it for this episode of The Power Switch. We are hosted by RhymesWithAsia.com, and we're on YouTube and Twitch at RhymesWithAsia. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Power Switch. And you can email us any questions, concerns, comments, or opportunities at PowerSwitchPod@gmail.com. You can subscribe to The Power Switch on podcast services such as iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And if you'd be so kind as to leave a review, that would really help as well. But most importantly, to participate in future episodes, you should join our community on Discord by visiting rhymeswithasia.com/call. And that's a small but growing community, and in these early months of the show, as we continue to grow, it'll be easier than ever to have your voice heard on this podcast. If you want a YouTube video to watch, I came across the YouTuber Soviet Womble, and he has his Random Bullshittery series. In particular, this one is based on Arma 3. So Random Arma Bullshittery Part 8 is his latest one. And wife and brother and I have been catching up on that. And he has an interesting style of, playing with his friends in this, tactical military game. Good editing, does a lot of subtitling, which is, not only good for if you want to port videos over to other social media platforms that have quiet video, muted audio, but it makes more of an engaging watch than what otherwise may be just a slower, more dull sort of military shooter. So check that out, kind of a compilation of amusing moments of him with his friends. So yeah. Matt, one that you'd like to recommend, any YouTube video?
So without hesitation, I'd say that my favorite YouTuber is George Weidman, Super Bunny Hop. And he put out a video very recently. He is turning into something of an investigative journalist for gaming.
Yeah.
And no video of his is an example of that, quite as much like his recent video, How American Game Companies Avoid Paying Income Tax. Now, it's no secret that there is a problem with companies in America using foreign markets to avoid paying taxes, but we've never had someone examine how gaming is doing that, really. He looked at this and he said, well, no one's talking about this, so I'm going to talk about this. Because he wanted it to become relevant to us, because it is relevant to us. This is some, companies that we love and we're defending day in and day out are showing themselves to be just as bad in many ways as many other companies in America. Activision Blizzard's on that list. Valve is on that list. Companies that are avoiding paying taxes in the markets that they are operating in. He looks at these issues, does research himself, and talks to people that are involved. Another great video of his, just to show the kind of work that he does, is when he did research on changing laws in Japan to figure out why SNK was moving away from pachinko back into games. He had to do research on gambling laws in Japan and how they were changing through early legislation. He's doing some amazing work, in his latest video on companies avoiding to pay income tax is great, because it reminds us not only that there's no such thing as a lack of politics in any industry, because this is inherently political when game companies are lobbying for changing laws for their benefit. But it's also just fantastic to learn more about what exactly is going on, because he goes into the details of how it works and how it is affecting the games that we are playing.
Absolutely. And most importantly for him, he just launched a Patreon. So go support George Weidman's Super Bunny Hop. I know he's also done deep dives on the Metal Gear Solid series, particularly his video on 2 is, granted, it's dated, it's a little old, but it's still a fascinating watch. So go watch and support Super Bunny Hop. Absolutely. Well, Matt, I can't thank you enough. I mean, great thoughts today, and I'll have to have you back on the show another time, because very well spoken and, love talking about games this passionately with you, and, really appreciate the time. Anything you'd like to plug? I mean, anything really?
Good friend of mine and frequent contributor to the show, the Dobaga. Does he use his real name when he
usually goes by Doba, so.
Okay, so Doba, he does a series on his Twitch where he plays through the Nancy Drew series of video games.
Some Nance Drance.
And if for people listening right now, he is actually in the middle of a stream right this moment, and he's hoping to be doing this a bit more regularly. He's got plenty more Nance Drance to do, so you can check him out at twitch.tv/Detective Dobaga and see him go through these games that are hardly on the radars of many people. Some of them actually very good,
but there are
very bad.
There's so many Nancy Drew games.
I was very honored to be able to visit his apartment last week and find that on his shelf of things, like his figures, his decorations, his games, prominently displayed as a Nancy Drew game.
Oh, that poor guy. Oh boy. Well, we can find you on Twitter at GrimaceDoMenace. Go follow you for sure. Matt, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. This is great podcast.
Of course, happy to be here and pretend that I know what I'm talking about for a little while.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned to our Discord channel as everything develops. It's going to be a big week coming up here for me. I'm going on work travel, so as much as I'd like to stick to Sunday 6 p.m., I can't necessarily guarantee that. I'll be out in Portland, Maine, so we'll maybe have another show from the road at the hotel, but probably at a different time next week. So stay tuned for all of that. And whether it's live or on your own time, I look forward to you joining us for our next episode. With that, I'm Peter Spezia. Until next time, switch up, call in, game on.